With that, I want to move on to the next part. We got 5 parts. This is part 4, so we're almost to the end. So thank you for standing by. And this is completely raw, as you can hear. I'm, getting my voice back. This is the section that I had the most fun about. This is the part that I was trying to look up on the internet and could not find anything. And so I wanted to make it myself. I have a general understanding from what I read and how I comprehended it, and from the few things that I was able to find on the internet. But this is about the mythology, the lore of this Gregory and Maguire's, the Wicked Years universe. And so the first thing I want to touch on is the clock of the time dragon, what it represents and how it what part it plays in the story. So it's a TikTok contraption. It's a cart that is being pulled around Oz, and it shows up at various places. We get introduced to it when Elphaba is born. We'll talk about that in a second. And then it shows up later in her life, and then they reference it and stuff like that, kind of like as like an aside, something in the background, like, oh, have you heard about? And it has a part to play, but more like it's just kind of in the background, and we don't really quite know what it is, and we actually find out more about it in later books, not in Wicked. It stays nebulous. So it's a traveling cart that demonstrates performances like little puppet shows, TikTok puppet shows, that predict or suggest future events, often leading to a panic or emotional response by the people who witnessed it. And so the day that Elphaba was born, it showed a show. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens, but ultimately it encourages the crowd to chase Frexbar away. And some of the women are like, oh gosh, Melon is going to have this baby. We need to go help, protect her, keep her safe, because they're going to try to kill her too, because of what the Time Dragon show had shown them, and all the men were drunk. And so the women go help her. They actually bring her to the clock of the Time Dragon, hide her inside because it's the last place they'd look. She has the baby. She gives birth to Elphaba inside this clock of the Time Dragon cart. And there's an importance there. It's an intentional symbolism. It's a part of her. She's a part of it. She was born from it, or it was born from her, or the two of them are interlinked in some way. The first thing she touched when she came into the world, aside from the women, was the clock of the Time Dragon, and it influenced her for the rest of her life. And how it influenced her is mysterious and mythological. We'll get into that. But she was born inside of it, and it's symbolizing her otherness, her otherworldliness. And in a way, Frex and Melina think that, the words that they exchanged prior to it, like the devil is coming, Frex meant the clock of the Time Dragon, but Melina's like, how dare you say that on the day that our daughter is going to be born? You're going to curse her. And then she, Melina herself was like, I don't want this baby, kind of like felt like she cursed her daughter too. So when she came out looking green, everybody was like, oh no, what did I do? I cursed the baby. She's green as sin. This is our punishment, divine punishment for some, malfeasance that we've done, some thing that we've, that we're being punished with. And so, it later is revealed that, the clock, okay, so later, after Elphaba kills Madam Morrible, she runs into the dwarf at the clock of the Time Dragon. She's like, whoa, she's drunk. She just had this, conversation with Averick about what evil means. And she's like, I killed Madam Morrible, and everybody was like, oh, good for you, who's that? And so she doesn't know if anybody's really gonna give her credit for it. Madam Morrible was actually already dead, she just breathed her last breath, but Elphaba still bashed her head in so that she could take credit for it because she was that angry. So she's drunk, she's trying to revel in her accomplishment, but it's an empty celebration. So she's kind of angry and drunk, and she just had this really kind of stupid but invigorating conversation with Averick, who is he's a pleasure father. So he really doesn't care about accountability and stuff like that. He's like, I don't care. I know you. Why don't you eat with us? Let's get drunk. Let's invite some people over and chat. And so she's talking to this dwarf, and she's like, who are you? What's going on with this? Why are you following me? Why has this clock been around my entire life? What's happening? Who's Mother Yackle? And, you know, the dwarf obviously he can only answer certain things, but one of the things is, he's like, for you, a special show. And he makes the time dragon perform in a 3-act. And I'll get into those in a little bit, but the first thing it reveals is that Frex is off on the corner of the stage. The little puppet that represents her father is off on the side stage talking to the ether, preaching. And Melina is over here, and this little salesman comes in with a little green bottle, and they hanky-panky, and then, green baby. And Elphaba's like, no. But then this little salesman with the green bottle goes over to a hot air balloon and then exits center stage. And she's like, wait a minute, that can't be true. The Wizard of Oz is not my father. Or is he? And so the play has, you know, a huge, you know, the opening of, you know, the play is telling the story. So obviously how I started this video, Galinda says, you know, after all, she had a mother, she had a father, as so many do. And it goes into the story of Frex and Melina, and this happy little man coming across and goes, you know, have another drink of green elixir and we'll have ourselves a little mixer. Have another little swallow, little lady, and follow me down. And they fuck. So, in the play, we know from the beginning that the wizard is her father. In the book, you find out later after she's, you know, had these epiphanies. And we'll talk about the importance of why that happens, because of the way that the play for the Time Dragon happened. But the important part here is that she has this epiphany, or this realization that it might be telling the truth, and that might explain why things have been so weird for her. And this miracle elixir that was in a green bottle that Nanny still has, that she showed her a long time ago, and said that she, you know, she tried to, like, through this whole thing, she's like, wait a minute, this might be why I'm green. Green elixir, miracle elixir, green bottle, oh my god. Oh! And so we're starting to have some of these plot twists, these revelations of why she's different, why she's other, why she's green. But ultimately, the Time Dragon, the clock of the Time Dragon, it pops up when it's needed. And when she asks the dwarf his name, he says, I don't have a name, not one that you would understand. I just attend the clock. You know, I have my purpose, and you don't need to worry about that. So now we get into the wizard. Now, when it comes to the wizard, I just talked about the green elixir, in the play, the miracle elixir from the bottle with the half-ripped label in the book. And he's kind of like a grifter. They don't really tell us, and Melina kind of admits, she's like, I don't know, I kind of got drunk, and I was chewing on these weeds that kind of make me a little bit loofy. And she's like, so we might have fucked? Oh no, it's possible. Loose moral women. And that's, you know, the character that she's playing. So it leaves the reader to decide for themselves, is he or isn't he? Or does it matter? And that's really kind of the point. But with the wizard, obviously prior to his ascension to the throne, because he ends up deposing Ozma, the Ozma regent, that's holding the throne for the Ozma child, he's from another world. He's not from Oz. And he's kind of indoctrinating people into, like he's walking around going, why are your animals talking? That's weird. You shouldn't normalize talking animals. That's just bonkers. And everybody's going with it. And he's like, oh, look at me, I'm just this happy little dude. So, you know, when it comes to, like, mythical creatures, the wizard is different. He's from another world. Think he's alien. He's not even just foreign, because Fiyero is foreign. He's from another country. The wizard is alien. He is not from this world. And his mythos you know, whatever we want to take from the original Wizard of Oz film, or, you know, what we know from the L. Frank Baum series, is really kind of at our discretion, because ultimately he's not from Oz, just like Dorothy. What is he doing there? And that's really the general question. How did he get there? In the films, they said he got there by accident. He was looking for a way home, and now Dorothy's here, and all of a sudden he has a way home that he's had the entire time. Well, he has a purpose, and that purpose is explained later when he has that argument after Nessaros's funeral. And it's when he finds the page that was confiscated from Elphaba, from the Grimoire, and it's the administration or the summoning of dragons, or something along those lines. And she's like, wait a minute, you can read that? And he's like, yeah, I can read it. It's from my world. So he's right there admitting he's not from Oz. And he's like, wait, you can read it? Because nobody should be able to read that from here. And she's like, I can read parts of it sometimes. I get the gist. And now the wizard's like, oh. Who's to say whether he has an understanding of what happened, you know, why Elphaba can see? It's not for him to know, because it's her story, not his. And ultimately, his goals are not aligned with hers. And the purpose of the story is not to find out what's driving him from an insane megalomaniacal point of view. Nobody cares. What we do care about is why. And ultimately, he admits to her, I came here for that book. Where is it? I want it, and I want it now. And he brings in Nor, the child, Fiyero's daughter, that she has been trying to find, to save. And ultimately, he's like, no, I'm going to hold on to her. This is my insurance to keep you from trying to attack me. Bring me the book, and I'll bring you, and I'll let you have her, because then I got what I want, and I'll leave. And she's like, well, I'll give you the book now. If you leave, I'll give you the book. He's like, yeah, but you see, I'm too old now. I'm kind of satisfied with what I got here, because he's power hungry. He doesn't want to leave, but he does want the book. For what purpose? We find out what the book is later in the series. I think a little bit in A Lion Among Men, and then more so in Out of Oz. I haven't read Out of Oz, so I don't know. Those came out later. But the Grimoire is a part of the story that continues on throughout the entire series, into even the spin-off series with Rain and her adult life, the granddaughter. Talking about the Grimoire next is, first of all, it is Grimoire, not grimoire. Grimoire is a combination of the word Grimoire and gramarye. A Grimoire is clearly a book of spells, or sorry, a grimoire is a book of spells. A gramarye is literally how to spell. It's a, you know, where in English, you know, we consider, you know, we say like, oh, how do you spell your name? Well, how do you spell, or how do you spell? And that's kind of the play on words. And he does a lot of that double entendre, Gregory Maguire. So grimoire and gramarye are Grimoire. So this Grimoire is actually meant to, I don't know the sources. I really don't. I just Googled it. But it says that the Grimoire is said to have been a 17th century real life grimoire from Earth called the Lesser Key of Solomon. Interesting. Which is a real book. And so in the mythology, the mythos of Gregory Maguire's universe, this grimoire ended up in Oz by somebody, some male, we don't know who took it to Kiamoko and gave it to Sarima. Now, there's a little bit of a plot hole here, because ultimately the wizard has been there for 40 plus years. And he hasn't been in power that entire time. But he's looking for the book. But he says that it's a spell book from his world that was brought by another powerful sorcerer in Oz's past. And, you know, fan base is saying, oh, it's L. Frank Baum. It's an homage to the original creator of Oz. But ultimately, he's making it sound like it's ancient history. But we know that it's a male because he refers to with the pronouns he or him. But the plot hole is that Sarima, who is Fiyero's child bride, who already lived in Kiamo-ko, assuming after Fiyero died. So only like, what, 8, 9 years? So sometime in the last 9 years, another powerful sorcerer showed up on her doorstep and said, here, take this book and protect it, because I know that Elphaba's coming one day. It's supposed to be ancient history, but who knows? Who knows what, part of that's, the sleight of hand of the wizard. He's trying to misdirect. So who knows what's actually happening? But somebody put it at Kiamo-ko, this grimoire, and gave it to Sarima, who had no clue what it was, and she just stashed it up. So nobody's going to know where to find it, because nobody even knows it's there. She didn't even remember it was there. But Elphaba found it. Was that predestination? Was that happenstance? Who's to say? But that's the nature of the Clock of the Time Dragon, is that the future can be foretold, or at least appears to have been foretold. And then we start getting into other characters. So the dwarf at the Clock of the Time Dragon, him and his little cronies were there when Frexbar was attacked by the mob. When Elphaba, they went to go have a drink at a tavern when Elphaba was born. So the dwarf was there. Yakko was not. The dwarf goes with the Clock of the Time Dragon, wherever he needs to be. But he hasn't got a name. And then Mother Yakel appears in various different places. So Elphaba, in her drunken, fit, says, you need to explain this to me. And so the dwarf tells her that Yakel is like him, like a protector, but different. Their their goals don't align. He is meant to protect the book, and only the book. So he shows up in history to make sure that the book and its future are intact. But he's also, he originates from the book. He's a creation of the book, and ultimately he goes back to the book. Yakel, and we find this out, I think, in Out of Oz. I read ahead on Wiki. But Mother Yakel is the same. She is born from and goes back to the Grimoire. But she exists for a different purpose, and hers is not so much to protect or guide the Grimoire, but rather Elphaba herself. So Elphaba is a ward of the Grimoire, almost like she's being overseen by some unknown god, force. And Mother Yakel is a manifestation of the need to observe her throughout her entire life. So Mother Yakel, when Elphaba was born, she was born green. So Nanny took the green elixir to Oz and found an apothecary that sold her these pills to give to Melina so that the next child would not be green. That apothecary was an old woman named Yakel. When the kids at Shiz get drunk after Amakletch's death, they go to the philosophy club, and the doorman, or the doorwoman, that's selling them the tickets at the window is Yakel. In a different form, but still named Yakel. And then also, when Elphaba escapes from the botched assassination attempt with Madam Morrible, the Mother Superior at the Monterey, at this convent, is named Mother Yakel. And she gives her the name Sister Saint Elphaba in her hiding, and helps her, allegedly, birth Lear and rear him, I would assume, and then says, when you leave, it is your responsibility to take this kid with you. So Yakel is now directly interfering, but this is somebody that Elphaba's had direct interaction with as her superior for like 7 to 9 years. And she doesn't know that Nanny met a Yakel, or that the kids at Shiz met Yakel, because the kids at Shiz went to the philosophy club when her and Glinda decided to leave Shiz to go confront the wizard about Grammatic killing Dr. Dillamon. So then when she's at Kiamo-ko, at the behest of Mother Yakel, guiding her to her forgiveness from Sarima, she's reading these books, just like the Grimmery in the library, and she comes across these illustrations and stories of this jackal figure, an actual animal with a capital A, we assume, rearing offspring or something. I forget the actual story. I tried to Google it. I don't want to go through the book, but it's in there. But she finds these images in a book about this maternal seeming jackal. And she questions, I wonder if there's any association between yackle and jackal. And then later, after she kills Morrible and has her little drunky party with Averick, when she confronts the dwarf and the Clock of the Time Dragon, that's where the play comes into place. So, the Clock of the Time Dragon says that he's going to give her a special show in 3 acts. The first act is her young childhood. The second act is, I think, adult, like, shiz stuff. I forget the exact. But the third one is the most important one. It says Act 3. I gotta scroll down because I can't remember. The Marriage of the Saint and the Wicked. And she's sitting there in anticipation, and nothing happens. She goes, hey, I think it's broken. He's like, who said it was written? And so there's a lot that we can interpret from that, and I'll get into that in a minute because there's a larger theme there. But ultimately, she confronts this dwarf and says, who is Yackle? And that's when he says, oh, Yackle's always been there, and she serves a different purpose. And ultimately, we find out in later books that her purpose was to guide Elphaba and her descendants, as part of the objective of the Grimmery. So same but different. But he also says that Yackle is, she's not a guardian angel. She's more like a fiend. More like the antithesis of a fairy godmother. So she's kind of like a negative. She's not this guiding light, this good element in her life. She's actually kind of interfering and making things really complicated and bad. And then ultimately the dwarf, he's just like, hey, I'm just for the book. That's all I exist for. And so she goes off. So we have, again, these two characters who are not part of the or part of we'll call it the natural world of Oz. They are otherworldly. They are magicked into existence for one reason or another. In moving on into the mythology, we talked about the creation, the paganist beliefs of Lurlinism. So you have Fairy Queen Lurline and the line of the Princess Ozmas. And so she's the matriarch and the creator. So she's like let's say Mother Earth or a fairy godmother. But her daughters are the queens, the rulers, the sovereigns of the world of Oz, of the land of Oz. And the wizard actually exists to subvert that power into the hands of people undeserving. And so we have this underlying feeling that the line of the Ozmas needs to be put back in power. And that comes into play more into Son of a Witch and Land Among Men, because they talk about what happens after the wizard leaves. In Son of a Witch, we learn, so Lear actually comes into contact with a character called Tip. And we learn that when, and this is extracurricular knowledge, we learned that when the wizard staged the coup against the Ozmas, the Ozma regent, the person who was ruling in favor of, or in the absence of, the Ozmas, because the child was still a baby, he stole the baby, Ozma Tipitarius, and magicked her into a boy. And this boy was raised named Tip. And Tip comes into contact with Lear, and they have interactions. So Tip ends up being a character in the sequel to Wicked. And so I'm going to reread this first and then go into my analysis, kind of the same as I am here, maybe not as much detail because it's not as popular book. But ultimately, we find, or we come into contact with Ozma Tippetarius as Tip. And eventually, so in Son of a Witch, A Lion Among Men, both of those books, they kind of talk about the political upheaval of what is left, this power vacuum. And the Scarecrow ends up being the emperor in the place of the wizard. He takes that it's a straw man argument. Hello. Literally a straw man government put in place to fill the power vacuum left by the wizard when he left with Dorothy back to Earth. The Scarecrow is ultimately deposed, and the character of the Scarecrow, if I remember correctly, again, I have to reread this or audiobook it to kind of familiarize myself with it, but the idea in the play and in the book, Wicked, Elphaba wants and hopes beyond all desire that she has within her to protect Fiyero. Now, in the book, it's understood that Fiyero is attacked and we don't know if he's living. So when Dorothy is coming to Yamako with the Cowardly Lion and Toto and the Tin Man, she prays, what if this Tin Man, because she can explain the other ones, but she doesn't know anything about the Scarecrow. She's like, what if it is Fiyero in disguise coming back to me and he's been hiding all along? And so she sends her crows, she sends her dogs, her beasts, to go find out, is there a man hiding in there? She even tells Lear, you might get your wish. You might get to meet your father. He's like, what? But they misinterpret these animals coming at them as an attack and kill them. So ultimately she's like, no! She's freaking out. She just wants to know if the straw man is Fiyero. In the book, the crows start pulling, or in order to cover the Tin Woodsman and like from the rain, I think the straw man is like pulling out his fluff and putting that on them, and she's like, oh, there's nothing in there. Fiyero can't be in there. So she's heartbroken again, realizing that Fiyero is not the Scarecrow. So now we've got the history of the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, and of course Dorothy. Now, the straw man, not Fiyero in the book, confirmed, or at least there's no answer, ends up filling the role for the wizard as the straw man government, and ends up being not a good character. So, A Lion Among Men, ultimately Burr, the name of the cub that she rescued at Shiz, grown up as the Cowardly Lion. Now he has a spine. I forget. If he only had a brain, I think is what it was, or no. I forget what the line. But anyway, after he succeeds in kind of standing up against his own fear, he kind of starts becoming kind of more like Dr. Dillamon, and I'll have to read that again, obviously. But the whole point of this is that we have this character of Tip, who is rightfully, as we learn later, the Ozma Tippetarius princess, magicked into looking like a boy by a sorcerer. And she is ultimately the ruler of Oz. And it's only when the Scarecrow is deposed that she allows the Cowardly Lion to take his place as her regent. And she rules in absentia through the lion, and the lion becomes the emperor, or the Ozma regent. So we've got the characters and the story and the history and the lore and the mythology around these characters that we've known for so long. But Princess Ozma plays such a huge part. It's the creation myth, it's the King Arthur myth, it's all of those wrapped into one that Maguire made into the story that we already know. And if you watched any of the films like Return to Oz, Princess Ozma is a character that's always existed, and she's actually in the Elfringbound books too. So next I want to move on to Saint Elphaba and the Cumbric Witch. So when we talk about the Clock of the Time Dragon and its third act that is not yet written, it said the marriage of the sacred and the wicked. And that's important because it's going to parallel Elphaba and our knowledge of what she represents. So Sister Saint Elphaba is it's a folklore tale that they tell the kid, or that the Monts tell, about this mystic who would go out into nature and commune and get naked, and she wants to become holier and kind of commune with that nature, with, you know, Lorlina or whoever. And she's sainted because she would bless people. And so she goes and she hides in this cave to contemplate nature and her own holiness, and kind of, let's say, search for nirvana if we're, you know, looking at Buddhist Eastern religions. So she's going to meditate in this cave behind a waterfall. So she's Saint Elphaba of the waterfall, and she takes she's naked. She has no possessions. She's very, you know, she's very like simple, and she takes a bunch of grapes and she eats them, and she prays and she ruminates, and eventually she runs out of grapes. And so she comes out and realizes hundreds of years have passed. And so now all of a sudden she's out of grapes, and she doesn't realize that all this time has passed. So she goes out and people are like shocked and afraid of her. They're like, oh my God, you were a myth. She's like, she starts blessing them. She's like, okay, I want more grapes. And she goes back into the cave. So, that's her story. And really, so when we're looking at symbolism and stuff like that, it's kind of like a Rip Van Winkle, like she fell asleep and woke up, you know, at a later date, time traveling. When we look at her, she's kind of symbolizing the future, and that's representative with Elphaba, with the looking glass. And we'll talk about the looking glass later. It's a glass mirror that was blown for her by Turtleheart when she was a child. So she's the embodiment or the personification of the future. She is Saint Elphaba of the waterfall. She time travels forward.